Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor and subscribe to the John Con Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, you know the drill. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It is always appreciated. Today, I'm joined by my pal Nicki Jhabvala of the Washington Post as we discuss the health scare she underwent this spring. And fortunately, there's a lot of good news attached to it. But it also, I admire, and so do the other reporters, admire the way she approached her job while undergoing all this stuff. And, you know, there's a lot to admire about Nicki. So we talk about that. We also talk about her reasons for optimism and concern regarding the 2022 Washington Commanders as we enter training camp. We're only about a week and a half away, folks. It's a lot closer, finally. I also asked her about other parts of the roster. ESPN did a recent top 10 players at each position. Jeremy Fowler did it based on talking to coaches and executives. What does it say about the roster? Some guys that maybe aren't necessarily top 10 guys, but guys who can ascend here that maybe in a year from now, they're viewed a lot differently and it could strengthen this roster. I also asked her, we talk about Carson Wentz, the style that she anticipates for the offense and some expectations for this offense. Players she is most anxious or curious to see entering training camp. So good conversation with Nicki. You can follow her on Twitter at Nicki Jhabvala, and that's NICKI JHABVALA. And you can read her work on WashingtonPost.com. You can read my work, of course, on ESPN.com. Before I turn to my conversation with Nicki, bear with me for 1 minute, because I want to give you somewhat of an injury update, or maybe not an injury update, but let's look at some possible timetables for two key players involved with the Commanders, Chase Young, Logan Thomas. First, Chase Young. If I had to guess right now, it would be that he would return around mid-September at the earliest. So that could mean 1 or 2 games missed. It could also mean he'll miss a few more after that. Don't know, but I think the target right now would probably be around that time. Again, that's a strong guess, but there's still more to learn about that. One thing I like in this situation, nobody is pushing for the all-in for week 1 scenario. His side made that clear to me a while ago that while, you can look at him and he's doing all sorts of good things, but they didn't want to push him to just reach the opener, because then you can make, as we've seen before, you can do that as your goal, but the goal needs to be come back and to be able to be the player that you think you can be. And I think that's the approach they're taking here. That's why I think when he comes back, he'll be in a better spot because of that. So that would be my guess there. As far as Logan Thomas, I'm going to back up for a minute. Part of the reason with Chase Young had his knee injury a month before Logan Thomas. I think Logan Thomas has a good chance to return before Chase Young. And part of it is that Thomas's surgery was not, they're both ACLs, but Thomas's surgery was not as invasive as Young's, which is why I think Young's timetable is a little bit different than Thomas's. We'll get a better sense of where Logan Thomas is at probably in mid-August or so. And at that point, will he be ready for the opener or not? So I think he's got more of a chance to be there for that. Don't know yet. So there's just still more to learn. But I did want to give you at least a little bit of a sense of what's going on there. So now you know. Now let's turn to my conversation with Nicki Jhabvala of the Washington Post. Well, Nicki, it's really good to see you, and I can't wait to see you back out at training camp where you belong. Clearly, you've had some medical stuff going on, and I'm just wondering if you can kind of fill people in on what you've had to deal with the last few months.
Yeah, it's been a strange summer vacation. So I found out in late February, early March, actually, right after the combine, that my blood counts were all out of whack and I had to get a full workup and everything. And I was diagnosed with something called severe aplastic anemia, which basically means my bone marrow was failing. So over these last 3 months, I've been living primarily in Baltimore to be close to Johns Hopkins Hospital, where I've had a bone marrow transplant. My sister was my donor. And I also had my gallbladder removed. So, the transplant is the treatment is very similar to cancer treatment. You undergo chemotherapy, full body radiation, and have your transplant. And then it's just a pretty lengthy recovery with some unpleasant medications. But yeah, I was discharged last week, got to ring the bell, which was incredibly exciting for everybody in my family because they've been through a lot too with all this.
Yeah.
And now it's just kind of waiting out the road to recovery. It could take a full year to fully feel like myself again, but I feel so much better already. So very grateful to be at this point, very lucky to have had a transplant. So many people that need a transplant don't find a match or are unable to get one. So I feel incredibly fortunate for that.
And who was it that got the transplant for you?
My sister was my donor. So she lives in Colorado with the rest of my family, flew out to Baltimore, donated marrow, and I was able to get it. We were matches, and it's worked out great. It's been a hard road, definitely harder than I thought it would be, but totally worth it for sure.
Well, and I know you well enough to know how much it bothered you not to be out there. So you're
killing me.
It was killing you, but you're still writing stories from.
Yep.
How tough was that, just from a reporter standpoint?
It gives me anxiety. And then I, further confirmed that I have no life. But every day I couldn't be out there for like availability or to talk to players during OTAs. I hated it. I hate missing time. I love my job. I like doing it the way I've always been able to do it, which is just kind of give my everything to it. And with this, I wasn't able to. I haven't been able to, but I still want to stay involved with my job and stay writing as much as I physically can. So fortunately, I work at a great place and they allowed me to kind of go at my own pace while still focusing on my recovery. So it was important to me, and I didn't share a ton of details at first because I did want to keep working. I don't want this to be my identity in any way. I'm very proud of, what me and my family overcame, but I'm just a reporter. I just want to do my job,
Absolutely. How much were you motivated by the fact that last year I wrote a story while I had 100-degree fever? Was that a big motivating factor for you?
It was in the back of my head, and I'm like, gosh darn it, if Kime can do that.
That's why I did that.
Yeah, I know. I saw what you were doing. I picked up on these subtle things, Sean.
But you are in a good spot now, correct?
Yeah. No, my blood counts all look great. Just trying to get my strength back up. I lost a good bit of weight and lost my hair, obviously, but it's starting to grow back. But my blood counts look great, and that's the most important thing is to get those back up at a normal and healthy level.
And a shout out to your parents who were there the entire time.
Oh my gosh, my parents are incredible. They live in Colorado too. They drove cross country and have been staying with me for about 3 months. They've been absolutely incredible. And you have to have a 24/7 caregiver to undergo something like this. And I've had 2 of them essentially. So it's been incredible. They're wonderful.
Well, I'm glad to hear all that. And, it was nice to see you out at OTAs in one day. It'll be great to see you out at training camp and to have you back there, full and functioning and being Nicki. So,
yes.
And I'm sure within 10 minutes, you'll probably regret being back in there with all of us when you get the corny jokes and all that. So you might think, it wasn't so bad being in the Zoom. And
I love your dad jokes, Kime. I live for those.
Well, my kids don't, but I will say they shake their head, but I really know what they're doing. They're secretly writing them down. So I know that. I haven't caught them yet. It's just a gut instinct, and I operate on that.
Yeah, just saving them for like 10 years down the road. I got you.
There you go. So let's talk now. An awkward transition to something that doesn't matter quite as much, but it's going to be coming up is this Washington. I was going to try. Well, what are they? The football team, the Commanders. So we're about a week and a half from training camp. And one of the things I want to talk to you about is just Jeremy Fowler from ESPN did a top 10 series about players at each position. I know Terry was included in that. John Allen was included in that. Chase Young was included as an honorable mention, and Antonio Gibson was someone who got some mention. So he was not in the top 10, but got some mention. I don't know how much you were able to see of that, and did you have any takeaway as far as how maybe this roster is viewed beyond Washington? or what did you have any takeaway from that at all with where these guys were or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get a sense that this team is viewed like most other middle tier or slightly below middle tier teams in that, people know the stars of the team, but they don't necessarily know or hear much about the guys that have the potential to reach that level. Like, I think such a big name coming out of OTAs and minicamp this year has been Benjamin St. Juice. I mean, here's a kid who didn't get to play much as a rookie because of concussions. But he's an athletic freak, and he could really be a huge asset to them in the secondary, which has kind of been a rotating cast for each of the last 3 seasons, really. So, I mean, he's somebody who could play in the slot. They could try to move him outside again. I think he's somebody that is so versatile that he fits pretty much anything they could want to do back there, be it Buffalo nickel, moving them all around, sort of like a Cam Curl type. He has a potential for that. He certainly hasn't proved it yet, but I think that's what you get when you look at this team is, the big names, but you don't know all the possibilities in between. And some of them are really promising, like St. Juice, and then others are still unknowns, really, guys that have been there the longest of many of the players. I look at Cole Holcomb, he somehow overnight, it felt like, went from a guy that they didn't seem too comfortable with playing in the mic to now he's our guy at the mic. And I feel like most of the league really just doesn't know who Cole Holcomb is still. So you get a lot of that. And I think it's fitting, they've been to 1 postseason since Ron has arrived, but they've had 2 losing seasons. And this is just such a huge year for them and proving themselves on the national stage.
Right. And I think, I think what it says too, like Chase Young getting an honorable mention after the year he had last year, I think speaks to the talent that kid has. And I think Gibson, would like to be in that top 10. And maybe after this year, he would be. And I think the key with these things are always not where you're at right now, where are you at the end of the season? And did you elevate yourself to that? I was a little bit surprised that Cam Curl got no mention out of about 15 to 20 safeties. But I also think that's why I wonder there's that belief here. Cam Curl's a really good player. But then when you branch out league wide or you move out league wide, how is he viewed? And how does that play into a down the road contract? But again, I think here's the other thing, Nicki, too, that I think with some of those guys, and St. Juice wouldn't be in there, but I think to your point, there are some guys here who you still say, don't look at their roster as a like, these are the only guys who can elevate to a certain area. You do have some young guys who could take that step, which can elevate the defense. Right. And finally, like a guy like Cam Curl, he would be helped if this defense finished in the top 5. Then I think the perception of him almost changes. Do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I looked at Terry in that regard. I mean, Terry seemed like, for the longest time, even for his first 2 years, you're like, why don't more people know about Terry McLaurin? And it's because of the status of the team. You don't get selected to Pro Bowls when you're on a losing team. You don't get, the all pro mentions. That's just the way it is. It's unfair. It's silly, but that's the way it is. And I look at Cam Curl similarly. Now he hasn't done as much statistically as Terry, but he could be on that same trajectory, and one big year from him could really set him on a path toward, another big money deal. Look, a guy that I always think about too is very similar to both players really is Justin Simmons, who's a safety in Denver, 3rd round pick out of Boston College. Not many people knew him outside of his, impressive combine tape. And now he's one of the best safeties in the game. Like it takes being on the right team, on the right defense, and, putting the numbers up in spite of your circumstances. And I think Cam Curl has a chance to do that.
I think that's a good point too with Cam, because Cam's also the kind of guy that, to me, a lot of value I see in his game hasn't been as much the huge plays as it is what he takes away by doing his job. And that takes a while to get noticed, I think, in a grander scale. But yeah, if they go out and they have a top 5 D and he's making a couple of big plays, because he'll also, with that Buffalo nickel, he'll play some in there too in the Landon Collins role more than anybody else possibly. Now, I don't think he'll be full time with that, but it might put him in a position to make more big plays.
Right. And one of the guys that I still think is still pretty unknown is Logan Thomas, because he's had the
Right.
injuries the last year, but he had that really great season, his first years of full-time starting tight end. So, there's, a pretty high floor for him. It's, what's the ceiling? And we haven't been able to see that because of the injuries, but, he's been in the league quite a bit after the position change, but he's still kind of an unknown. I still think he's somebody who could, if he can stay healthy, elevate to one of the top players at his position.
But
Okay.
I'm glad you brought up Logan Thomas, because he wasn't even included in that list of players receiving votes for this. And I wondered how much of it was due to the injury. I'm guessing it is, because there were some players that were listening and I'm like, well, there's no way that some of these guys should be ahead of Logan Thomas. But to your point too, he's going to be such a valuable asset for Carson Wentz in the red zone. And when you watch Carson Wentz, and this is why we keep hearing wide catch radius, because his throws are off target a lot, enough that having a guy like Thomas who can make those kind of catches in a tight area will be huge. So I think that his omission from that was as much because of the injuries, I would think. But yeah, I mean, he's such a valuable part of this offense. How much better are they, do you think, when he's on the field? I mean, that's a kind of a dumb question, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think he makes the players around him better too. You mentioned the catch radius makes him that much more quarterback friendly. And we know how much Carson favors his tight ends. I think it was him and Lamar Jackson were 1 and 2 over the past 3 years, right? So, I mean, I think he's a huge asset. And I think he helps the other tight ends. I mean, they got a young group behind him. A lot of guys that are converts too, that were either receivers, quarterbacks, and another position that kind of stepped in and are learning tight end at the pro level. And I think he's huge for those guys. I think he's got that Terry McLaurin leadership too, which it's hard to quantify at any level, but I think it's important nonetheless. But you pair his size, his athleticism, his knowledge of the quarterback position too. I think that comes, incredibly handy in the game. Alongside, the Terry McLaurin, the speed of Curtis Samuel, if he can stay healthy, of Antonio Gibson. I mean, they have a ton of assets if they can all stay healthy and play together on offense. But yeah, I think Logan Thomas is a huge piece of this defense. I think production alone, I mean, they relied solely on him for much of the 2020 season. And to get that back would be such a boon for this offense.
What are your expectations for this offense?
Production-wise or stylistically or what?
Let's start with production.
I mean, I would expect them to put more points up than they have over the past 2 years. I would hope so anyway. I feel like the last 2 years with Scott, he's been kind of experimenting and adapting to a continual rotation of cast members, be it quarterbacks, filling in for tight ends with the injuries at that position. He's always depleted at receiver by, middle to late in the season. Terry McLaurin has been the one staple, the one constant. Running backs, he's relied on AG, he's relied on McKissick. So I think a lot of it has been adapting to the personnel and not necessarily running the offense as you envision it. So I would expect if they can stay healthy, that there would be a lot more production. The number of touches for each guy may go down because you only have one ball, right? So, but I think it should be more dynamic, but I feel like we've gone into every year saying that it's all a matter of circumstances, really.
Sure. Do you think how long do you think it might take to have things, I guess, quote unquote, come together? I mean, new quarterback, Dotson is new, but you get Curtis Samuel back, we think healthy. So how long do you think, what expectations do you have for it to be there at the start of the season versus maybe, taking a few weeks to kind of hit a stride?
I could see it taking a few weeks to hit its stride. I would feel better if they would, for once, have, joint training camp practices or some way to come, use a gauge to see where they're at against another team instead of just going against each other. That's what makes it so hard to, tell where they're at as a team during training camp, but they won't have that this year. So I could see it taking a couple weeks. You just hope it doesn't take more than a quarter of the season, because then you're way behind and you don't want to be 0-4 going in, especially with the late bye. So,
right. And a slow start with the offense doesn't have to mean a loss. It just means that it's not going to be operating So stylistically, what are you anticipating?
I would expect to see it, more vertical, stretching the field. I mean, you got playmakers now. Terry's always been there. You got tight ends. You make the most of those. You got versatile guys that that can double as backs or receivers. So that's something they keep saying they want to do every season, to stretch the field, but it's kind of hit or miss.
Right, and I think they can expand areas of the field too. And it's funny because going back and watching some of Carson Wentz, there are throws that he makes there are things that Taylor Heineke does well. We know that he doesn't have the arm to compare to Carson Wentz, and this is not knocking him, but there are definitely things that Wentz does with his arm that you say, that's not a completion here. Most guys can't make that throw, and it just allows for some bigger plays. Now, there are things he does that may allow for some negative plays, but I think that arm can open up the field as well.
Right. And I'm curious to see if they can consistently have at least 2 to 3 solid receivers on the field at the same time, be it true receivers or, a tight end or another back. How does that open things up for Terry? Because he led the league in contested catches, but he's doing it all himself. You don't have another threat on the outside, or he didn't really for much of the past 2 years. You had guys that would have some big games, but consistently there were so many injuries to that group. I'm curious to see what will having these additional playmakers do for him. How will this open up his game too, which could be huge.
Right. And I think, if Dotson, and I talked about this on the previous podcast, but if Dotson comes in and can show that he can be a threat, teams are going to double Terry right away. They're going to force Dotson to prove he can do something, but there's so much. They don't have the one flat out burner like Tyreek Hill, but they have a lot of speed that you can incorporate that speed and not just down the field, but across the field that can open up things for Terry as well.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, we haven't really even talked about Curtis Samuel, but he didn't have much of a season last year because of the hamstring and groin injuries. But if he can come back and stay healthy, that's a huge addition for this offense. I mean, that's why they gave him $33 million or whatever. So if they can get him back and have him back consistently, that opens a lot of things up for them.
What's your level of confidence with his health?
I mean, I sure hope he can stay healthy for his sake and the team's. I'd say probably at this point it's probably 40-60, just because it's a complete unknown. I mean, even in OTAs, they had to slow it down for him a bit. So we'll see.
So let's go with a couple of things. Player you most want to see in camp, or most looking forward to seeing in camp?
I want to see Brian Robinson. I mean, he's a bigger back, powerful back. I want to see what he adds to that group with JD, who is primarily their third down back, AG, who's, probably has a skill set to be more of a feature back, but is he mentally ready? When he dealt with the fumbles last year. I want to know what Brian Robinson adds to this offense. And he's a huge back. I think he could be a real threat back there. I think he could really help them. And he's, I was kind of surprised by the pick at first. I know they wanted to add to the running backs room, but I was kind of surprised by the pick. And then I see him out in OTAs. I'm like, wow, this kid could be a problem out there.
Right.
So he's one of them that I'm really curious about. And then also just generally the offensive line. I mean, they went into this saying, we kept the front intact and we want to, have the same success. And then they lose both starting guards. Their center isn't fully healthy yet, Chase Roulier. So, how much of that can they recreate from last year? I mean, they've dealt with a number of injuries too, and have kept it pretty consistent up front. Can they do the same this year? I mean, I think it kind of all starts with that front five.
So you brought up, and let's go on defense, same question then. Biggest player you most like to see on defense? You brought up St. Juice. You brought up a couple of those. Who is the guy that you're looking most curious to see?
Chase, when he's healthy, certainly. I also want to see if Montez can take a bigger leap too. I think he gets overlooked a lot because of Chase on the opposite side. I thought he had he was healthier for longer, but, I thought he overall has had, better season production wise than Chase had. Certainly he has more experience there. So, I mean, he's just a freak human physically. Can he take that next step to really becoming an elite edge rusher? He's one that has kind of always intrigued me because he's quiet. You just kind of wonder what he is. And we've seen him on the field in camp. He gets pretty loud, pretty vocal, which was kind of surprising last year when we saw that side of him, or at least it was for me. But I want to see him kind of take his game to the next level.
And I'm glad you brought him up, because I was going to mention him earlier as a guy when, you look at this defense who can ascend to a certain level. And you kind of forget that if that guy doesn't have the health issues, he's probably a top 10 pick a few years ago. So this talent is there. I just think I agree with you. I think he's a guy that I think they're curious to see what he does. But if he has, would it shock you if he went out? And part of it might be what depends on when Chase Young comes back. But would it shock you if he went out and had a better year than Chase Young?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, he's got more experience for one. They're two very different rushers.
They are.
Very different. So it would not surprise me. And that's not a knock against Chase at all. I just think they're two different players. And I think, this team is lucky to have two edge rushers of their caliber. But I do think it's time for Montez to take that leap, especially if he wants to earn that next big deal. So I wouldn't be surprised if he has a monster start to the season, period, even if it's without Chase on the other side, because he's got, the guys on the interior who are pretty freaking good, and if he's kind of the lead edge rusher on one side and you got James Smith-Williams on the other, that can open up a lot of opportunity for him. So it would not surprise me at all if he jumps out to a quick start.
Biggest reason or biggest concern going into camp?
Biggest concern going into camp, I'd say still probably the linebackers. I know Cole has made improvements each year, but I don't, we know what the team said and seemed to feel about him after the season. They've kind of changed their tune completely. Is that out of necessity, and that they didn't find that guy to be the Mike and they really want to, encourage him to take that step? I think they're missing depth there, period.
Agreed.
And that position as a whole has kind of been a liability for them over the last few years. So.
And it's funny because I would have the same thought. And I was talking to somebody about Cole the other day, and I just said he went during the season that you'd hear he's a true outside linebacker after the season, true outside linebacker. And then suddenly he's this guy that, hey, he could be the answer. Is that based on what they saw in the film study, or is it based on, like you said, and we'll find out. I mean, I don't know if they fully know where he's going to get to yet. And for me, the whole thing with him is not just can he go do it, but he also impact Jamin Davis with the calls, the audibles, and not just make the audibles, but then you got to react like this as well. That's a hard thing to do as an inside linebacker. So, but I agree. Last one then, biggest reason for optimism with this team. Biggest reason for optimism,
because they're at a crossroads. They absolutely need to win now. This is year 3 under Ron Rivera and his staff. They've had 2 losing seasons. They're running out of time. And I think everybody, I'm sure, has to feel that to some degree. Players, I'm sure, feel it every year as they're fighting for a position, but this is when you really got to start to prove it. You're no longer, we're trying to see where we're at. We're trying to develop in year 2 and take steps. No, you got to show something now at this point. So I think that motivation alone could be huge. I don't know if Carson Wentz is the answer. I always come back to, along with most other people, the fact that he's been dealt twice in 2 seasons, but he is, talent alone a heck of a quarterback, and we all saw what he could do in 2017, and maybe he can get back there close to it, and if so, that's a tremendous upgrade over what they had. So if they've made upgrades at these positions, if they can stay healthy and really use that year 3 motivation, then I think they really do have a chance.
Yeah, and I do think, compared to what he had in Indy last year, overall the depth of skill talent is just greater. And and I think that it's incumbent upon him to be whether it's not more accurate, but, there are certain things he can do better, but I definitely think he's going to be thrown to a better overall group of targets for him. I also wanted to ask you too about, there was a whole flap with the 90th anniversary and the players that you could vote to be on the greatest 90, Trent Williams, obviously. Then there were misspellings and all sorts of, what did you take from that whole thing?
Yeah, it reminded me a bit of the Sean Taylor flub from last year. And Listen, I know they've overhauled their front office. I think the intent within that group is really positive. I know they've come in, they've made a lot of changes. They really do intend to, turn things around within that front office. But I still think this shows the importance of having some people even, who really understand the history of the game, of the organization, of where this team has been, that can appreciate the fans' loyalty amid these, past 2 decades, really, and better understand what they've been going through, because these mistakes just shouldn't be made. And no matter the intent of not having Trent Williams on there or off, or, whether it was just an oversight or there was any sort of grudge, I don't know. But whatever the reason, the mistakes just can't happen. I mean, you just lose trust when you're trying to build it. But they did make up for it and, amending their list. It's just, I think people remember more and more each of these mistakes. And
sure. And I think too, with the Trent situation, like you hear things about why it may or may not have been happening. I don't know. I can't assume that it was just, Snyder hates him, whatever. But if you're not going to put him on there, don't put Kirk on there. But I think the other thing that I think is bothersome is all the, the misspellings and the wrong dates and all that. And the one thing I go back to is when like Mike Shanahan would talk about the Niners organization when he was there in the 80s with Bill Walsh, and a standard that gets set, not just for players and coaches, but for everybody in the organization. And when you consistently have those things, you're putting them out, and this is not on the PR staff. It's a separate group that's doing a lot of that stuff. When you consistently do that, to me, it looks subpar as an organization.
Right. Exactly. I agree 100%. And this is an organization that has said in their own words, they want to be the gold standard. So you gotta
hit that gold, and right now with this, it's not even a silver. So, and that's where they can improve. And again, it doesn't mean that will it lead to more wins or losses if they get these spellings right? Well, no, but I think it just sets a standard for the organization that you want to reach. And if you're demanding this of this person here, then you're demanding it over here, here, and here. So that's, that's how I view it. And so we'll see. I know, like you said, that there are people over there who are busting their butt to make this a better situation and organization. We know that, and it's going to take a while to achieve that, but you got to get those things right.
Way like this. Yeah. You got to get out of your own way sometimes. So.
Well, Nicki, it was great to see you, and I can't wait to see you out at training camp. And it's a week and a half. You ready?
I know. It's coming. Thanks for having me, John.
All right, Nicki. That's it for this episode. Thanks to Nicki for joining me, and thanks to you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with another episode on Thursday. Talk to you next time.